and that witness, and also the criticism you have faced with regards to that interim report and the recommendations that you've made so far?
Well, the Madlanga Commission issued an interim report, and I have studied it, and I've accepted the recommendations, and the work of the Commission continues. There are a number of people who are still supposed to go back to the Commission as well as to the committee in Parliament. And I know people have specifically asked about Minister Mkhunu. And I have said I am waiting for that process to be completed. And it's going to be completed in 3 months. And then I am then going to respond to all the recommendations. So people are impatient over a 3-month delay. And right now, as I said, the recommendations will be implemented, and have also directed the minister to set up an investigative team. And yes, there have been criticism that the person who will lead or they will report to is the commissioner himself might be implicated. We're going to watch all that. We're going to watch that whole process with a hawk's eye. And I'm not going to, in the end, let the Madlanga Commission report or recommendations not be implemented. The work that is being done there is far too fundamental for the restructuring of our police service and indeed our criminal justice system. And let me say, people have always been very critical of us, of alleging that we don't implement recommendations of commissions. The Nugent Commission made recommendations about how we should reform SARS. And all of them, bar 1 or 2, have been implemented. We have implemented the recommendations from the Nugent Commission. We've made sure that there is no political interference when there was, that the commissioner acts independently when the past commissioner was trying to be influenced by others. So those recommendations are being implemented, and we will continue to implement recommendations. The problem at times is that people focus on one issue. Like right now, they're focusing on Minister Mkhunu and are not looking at all the other recommendations. And when the time comes, and I tend to act very carefully, when the time comes, I will also attend to that matter. And it will be based on all the recommendations that will have been made. So criticism, yes, can be made, but I do my work. And we've done my work when it comes to the Nugent Commission on the SARS matter. We've done our work when it comes to the Mpati Commission, when it comes to the PIC. And we're doing our work when it comes to the Zondo Commission. The Zondo Commission has made recommendations on a number of issues, including legislation. And we've passed legislation. We are preparing more legislation. And we have an ongoing report. The issue is people want to see what happens to big scalps. And that whole process is part of our criminal justice system.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has said he has studied and accepted the interim report of the Madlanga Commission and has made a firm commitment that its findings and recommendations will be implemented, a statement that places renewed focus on accountability, governance reform, and the credibility of commissions of inquiry in South Africa. Speaking in response to questions about the Commission's work, Ramaphosa said he would not allow the Madlanga Commission's report or recommendations to be ignored or left unimplemented. His remarks come at a time when public confidence in government processes remains fragile, shaped by years of corruption scandals, governance failures, and the slow pace of consequence management following major investigations. The Madlanga Commission, chaired by Constitutional Court Justice Mbuyiseli Madlanga, was established to investigate serious matters of public concern linked to governance, institutional conduct, and adherence to constitutional principles. While the Commission's work is ongoing, the release of its interim report has already drawn attention to systemic weaknesses within the state and has raised difficult questions about leadership, oversight, and accountability. By stating that he has studied and accepted the interim report, Ramaphosa sought to demonstrate personal engagement with the Commission's findings. The language he used suggested an attempt to distance his administration from past criticisms that commissions are often treated as technical or procedural exercises, rather than as instruments for real reform. His assurance that the recommendations will be implemented has been widely interpreted as a response to growing skepticism among South Africans. Over the past decade, several high-profile commissions of inquiry have produced extensive reports detailing corruption, maladministration, and institutional collapse. However, the translation of those findings into tangible action has been uneven and slow, contributing to public frustration and distrust. The most prominent example remains the State Capture Commission, chaired by former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, which uncovered extensive corruption involving senior politicians, state-owned enterprises, and private interests. Despite the depth of its findings, prosecutions and reforms have progressed at a pace many consider inadequate. Against this backdrop, Ramaphosa's comments on the Madlanga Commission have heightened expectations that this inquiry will lead to more decisive outcomes. The interim report of the Madlanga Commission is understood to contain preliminary findings and recommendations aimed at addressing structural and governance-related problems. Although interim in nature, the report is seen as setting the tone for the Commission's final conclusions and for the type of reforms that may be required once its work is complete. Legal analysts note that commissions of inquiry do not themselves have the power to enforce their recommendations. Their effectiveness depends largely on the political will of the executive, the capacity of state institutions, and the willingness of law enforcement agencies and oversight bodies to act on the findings. In this context, Ramaphosa's public commitment places responsibility squarely on the executive to ensure follow-through. The President's remarks also raise questions about how implementation will be managed in practice. Past experience has shown that even when political leaders express support for Commission findings, implementation can be undermined by bureaucratic delays, institutional resistance, or political considerations. Observers say that clear timelines, dedicated implementation mechanisms, and transparent reporting will be essential if the Madlanga Commission's recommendations are to have real impact. Civil society organizations have reacted to Ramaphosa's statement with cautious optimism. While welcoming his assurance, many have stressed that words must be matched by action. Some groups have called for the establishment of an independent monitoring mechanism to track progress on implementation, arguing that public accountability will be critical in maintaining momentum. There have also been calls for Parliament to play a more active oversight role. Parliamentary committees are seen as key to ensuring that departments and entities responsible for implementing the recommendations are held to account. Without sustained legislative oversight, critics warn that implementation could become fragmented or selectively applied. Within the governing African National Congress, Ramaphosa's stance may carry significant political implications. Implementing the Commission's recommendations could require difficult decisions, particularly if the findings implicate senior officials or point to failures linked to political leadership. This could test internal party dynamics and Ramaphosa's ability to maintain support while pursuing reform. The ANC has faced declining electoral support in recent years, driven in part by public dissatisfaction with corruption, unemployment, and service delivery failures. For some analysts, decisive action on the Madlanga Commission's recommendations could help restore some measure of public confidence. Others caution that internal resistance within the party could limit the scope or speed of reform. Ramaphosa has consistently framed his presidency as one focused on renewal and rebuilding state institutions after years of decline. He has emphasized the need for ethical leadership, professional public administration, and respect for constitutional values. His handling of the Madlanga Commission is likely to be viewed as another test of those commitments. The president's remarks also intersect with broader debates about the role of commissions of inquiry in South Africa's democracy. While commissions are seen as important tools for uncovering truth and in diagnosing institutional problems, critics argue that they have become substitutes for decisive governance, used to defer action rather than enforce accountability. Supporters of commissions counter that they play a vital role in establishing an authoritative record of wrongdoing and in making evidence-based recommendations for reform. However, they acknowledge that without effective implementation, even the most rigorous inquiry risks losing credibility. In this context, Ramaphosa's insistence that the Madlanga Commission's recommendations will not be ignored can be seen as an attempt to reaffirm the value of commissions as instruments of accountability. Whether this commitment is sustained over time will be closely watched. The legal and constitutional dimensions of implementation are also significant. Depending on the Commission's final recommendations, implementation may involve legislative amendments, changes to regulations, or reforms to institutional mandates. Some recommendations could require coordination across multiple departments and agencies, adding to the complexity of the process. There is also the possibility of criminal referrals arising from the Commission's work. While commissions do not prosecute cases, their findings can inform investigations by law enforcement agencies. In such instances, the independence and capacity of those agencies will be critical in ensuring that accountability is pursued without political interference. Public reaction to Ramaphosa's statement has been mixed. Some South Africans have welcomed his firm tone, viewing it as a sign that the government recognizes the urgency of restoring trust in public institutions. Others remain skeptical, pointing to previous assurances that failed to deliver meaningful change. For communities affected by governance failures and corruption, the stakes are high. Many South Africans experience the consequences of institutional dysfunction daily through poor service delivery, failing infrastructure, and limited economic opportunities. For them, the success or failure of implementing the Madlanga Commission's recommendations is not an abstract issue, but one that affects their quality of life. As the Commission continues its work toward a final report, attention will increasingly shift from the findings themselves to the question of implementation. Observers say that early action on the interim recommendations could help build confidence and demonstrate seriousness of intent. Ramaphosa's statement has effectively created a benchmark against which his administration will be judged. By publicly committing to implementation, he has limited his room to retreat or delay without political cost. This has raised expectations not only among the public, but also within government and the ruling party. The coming months are likely to reveal whether this moment represents a turning point or another cycle of promise and disappointment. The mechanisms put in place to oversee implementation, the speed with which actions are taken, and the willingness to confront resistance will all be closely scrutinized. Ultimately, the significance of Ramaphosa's remarks lies not only in their content, but what they signal about leadership and accountability in South Africa. In a political environment shaped by years of erosion in public trust, the president's assurance has set a clear challenge for his administration. For now, Ramaphosa has drawn a line by saying the Madlanga Commission's work will not be ignored. Whether that line holds will depend on what follows, on whether recommendations lead to reforms, accountability, and measurable change, or whether they join a growing list of reports whose impact fell short of their promise.